On our previous video, we went over the process of creating a RenderMan shader that could handle very simple texture mapping. After that, we concentrated a little bit into making this user interface area right here look a little bit better and a little bit more user-friendly. The only problem with what we have done so far is that it's very basically you need to have RenderMan Studio, Pixar's RenderMan Studio and Maya to be able to get that work done. I like to offer people the ability to learn how to do stuff without having every single piece of software out there. So I figure it's probably a good idea to have the same tutorial aimed at people that do not have Maya and they still want to learn RenderMan. So what I've done is I took this scene and I exported it, and we're going to go over the process of doing this same shader in 3D Light. So right now, I'm currently on this location. As you can see here, and actually let me resize this a little bit. I'm on this location, and if I go up one level, this is the folder where we've been doing most of the work in the previous videos. I just added a couple of new folders, one for rib and another one for text, for textures. You should be able to have access to these files by going to our GitHub repository, which is located at github.com/tdchannel/video files. Once you go there, you can navigate to the proper directory to find this information. So to be able to do this in 3D Light, we're going to have to make a small amount of changes. So first, I'm going to demonstrate the changes that we're making to the make file. So I'm going to go here, vim make file, and these are the changes we made. Basically, we took these two lines right here and we duplicated them, and instead of naming the variables SLO targets, we're naming them SDL targets, because SDL is the standard extension for 3D Light shaders. So basically what we're doing here is the same thing we're doing up here. So we're taking the SL sources, we're replacing .SL for .SDL, and then we're replacing the source and bin location just like we did in our previous example. And down here we had to create a new rule that would allow us to call a different compiler, which is shader DL, and that's the compiler for 3D Light. Let me go ahead and copy this here so that we, instead of using a constant here for bin, we actually use a variable. This way it's kind of easier to maintain our file. So I'm going to go here and get rid of these things. Okay, so those are the changes to our make file. Also, one of the things we did is we removed this little flag here, this -C flag for the compiler. We don't need it in shader DL because shader DL doesn't really support it. So with those changes, now we're gonna also need to make some changes to our texture. If you remember correctly, in the previous video, we were using a RenderMan. We took our texture and we turned it into a RenderMan format, into the RenderMan texture format. We need to do the same, but for the 3D Light format. So if we go to text, you're going to see here we have this TDC texture.tiff. So what we can do to make things work is basically we're going to go here and we're going to type, let me see, let's try to remember what I'm trying to remember what the texture command for texture, I think it's TDL make. Let's see. Yeah, TDL make. So that's the format TDL 3D Light uses. So if we do TDL make, and then we give it the input texture, which is TDC texture.tiff, and then we can do TDC texture dot, let's call it TDX, because so that we know that it's 3D Light texture. The extension is not really important, but it's good to assign one. Like usually my RenderMan textures are TX and 3D Light are TDX. So if you hit enter here, it's going to go ahead and make that. And I believe there's texture info, I think it is. Let's find let's give it a look here. So I was trying to look for the command to be able to look into the information of our texture, and I can't seem to find it right now here for 3D Light. So, but rest assured, by doing this, we pretty much have our texture done. So now we're going to have to find a way to use our texture. So if you go over here inside the texture mapping, inside the RIB directory, you're going to have two files. One of them is called simpletexture.rib, and the other one's called pplane job. Pplane shape 1. So the pplane shape 1, this file right here, basically contains the geometry for the plane. And this file right here, simple texture, this one contains the whole scene. So this file will reference and import this file into the scene so that you don't, basically this allows you to have many copies of this plane in the scene without having to grow the size of your main scene file, this simple texture one. So if we go ahead, make this a little bit bigger, and go here and do Vim simple texture, we can make this a little bit bigger and expand. So there's a lot of rib here, and most of it you won't even have to worry about. Here we have the output, and we have told it that we want to output it to the frame buffer. Let me make this a little bit bigger. You can see here, this is going to go up to the frame buffer, and it's going to use filter width of 2.2 with a cat move run filter. You know, a whole bunch of different settings. Down here is where you're going to find the light source, which is right here. The light source is a point light that is located 10 units above our plane. And then all the way down here is where you're going to have the call for a surface. So basically here where you see attribute identifier name pplane shape 1, as you go down into here, you'll see that here's the procedural, which does a delayed read archive of the file that I was showing you guys not long ago. So this file at the moment, it's going to try to find it on this location, and it might not be a good location. So I'm going to go ahead and change this, because right now, if you remember correctly, if I list the content of this directory, you see here's simple texture, and the pplane shape one lives in the same location, so we don't need to do a lookup. All I can do is do this, and it's going to know where to find it. Now for the shader, here we have a displacement of null. We can get rid of that line. We don't really have an interior. And as you can see, this shader right now points all the way to the directory where we're working, which is this one, texture mapping bin simple texture. And that's where the shader is located. So right now I'm going to go over to that location, and that is here. And like I made some changes to our make file, and I think I have built this already. So let me go here into bin, and I'm going to go ahead and remove simple texture.sdl, just so you know that I'm not pulling a cooking show on you. So that's where the make file is. So right now I'm going to go ahead and root a make, and since we changed our make file, it's going to go ahead and find the source file, which is simpletexture.sl, and it's going to go ahead and build us this new file, which is compatible with 3D Light. So we have our shader ready. So that means we don't really have to change this line. Now you're definitely going to have to change this line to point to the location where you have your shader. The other thing that we might have to change is this line right here, which it basically tells it where to find the texture. If we go out to your directory again, we see that the textures are located here in this RIB location. That's where our RIB file is. So the textures are located one level above in a folder called text. So we're going to go ahead and edit this file, and we're going to basically tell it how to find this. Let me go all the way over here and get rid of all of this stuff here. So basically, we're going to do the textual lookup relative to this RIB file. So we're going to tell it from the current location, if you do 2 dots and a backslash, that means go up 1 level. So I'm telling it go up 1 level, then go into text, and then find our texture, which is already there. So that being done, now I should be able to go over here, move into the rib location, and I should be able to do render DL with simple texture.rib. And if I hit enter, there you go. Let me resize this a little bit. So there we have the output of our image in 3D light, a completely different render, but you know, it conforms. So how do you make changes? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than making changes, of course, with a user interface. But I can go over here and tell it, okay, you know what, I want these two values to be 95. And I can see that it's flipped on the S, I'm sorry. So I'm going to go over here and find my flip S parameter and give it a value of 1. So once I save that, I can re-render, and now you see the background became a little bit more yellow and it flipped the texture. So this is something that we covered in our first RenderMan video. To be able to modify the look of my shader at render time, basically what you do is you make your surface call, with this, and then after that, any parameter you want to change, you go ahead and you do it by first typing these two words, which is pretty much the signature of the parameter that you're trying to change. And if I go ahead and open another file, so let me go ahead and let me open another file, go up one level, source, and simple texture. So here's where you'll be able to compare things. So you see here in the texture, in the shader texture, it says float KD, and over here, if you go to the next one, you'll see we have float KD. For surface color, surface color, it matches this over here, and the rest pretty much match. The ones that you're going to see are a little bit different. For example, here I'm telling it uniform, float, use alpha. Well, when you're defining these ones in this line, in the surface line, everything is pretty much uniform. So here we're doing float, use alpha, and we're putting the value between a bracket, and that allows us to control it. So you can use this same file to practice, you know, developing this particular shader for this tutorial. We're pretty much going to try to have a rib file for every of the different tutorials we have to make sure that all you have to do is go in there, hit render, and it should work. So that being said, as you saw here, we use this same shader to compile the 3D light shader. And because this is pure shading language, and I'm not using any constructs that might not be compatible, like if you start using some of the new stuff included in RSL 2.0, which is a new way of developing shaders, or if you're using any calls that are very specific to RenderMan and you know 3D light might not have them, then the shader probably won't compile. But this shader is pretty straightforward. So all we did is run our make file, which, as I said, we made very small modifications, and it was able to work. So that's all for this video. Hopefully you guys were able to follow along, and all you have to do is go back, write the shader, follow along, but every time you need to render, you will be rendering this file right here, simple texture.rib, using the render DL command. And I'll leave you for now with that quick little render. Thank you.